Okay, this is the vitamin and mineral discussion today. A little bit of a different presentation than it would be in most textbooks. Usually, vitamins and minerals are categorized or discussed in books based on their properties, and that's split between water soluble and fat soluble vitamins. And I've found that in teaching and sort of then understanding the function of them a little bit cumbersome because you end up with this massive list, and each vitamin mineral may have some overlap in terms of its overall function. So the way we present the vitamins and minerals for this section is actually based on their function. So the lesson objectives: understand the function of the major vitamins and minerals, and there will be categories. We'll get to that in a second. Talk about some foods that contain specific vitamins and minerals. So what are your sources of them? Understand the physiology underlying the function of them, and also get into toxicity and deficiency symptoms of them. A lot of the objectives for this discussion, and probably a little bit different than most talks that we've done this term, is going to be sort of up to you and doing a little bit of footwork. I'm going to introduce the topics. I'm going to introduce the groups of vitamins and minerals that are within a certain category. But then getting to the nitty gritty, it's would be insanely cumbersome for me to go over every one. So I'll talk about strategies at the end of the discussion for you to sort of accomplish these objectives. All right. So introducing vitamins and minerals. They're needed in small amounts, and they're really essential for a lot of our body functions. And really, you look at them, it's like, well, how are they different than macronutrients? Well, we need them in such small amounts. They don't provide us with energy. Really, they do the things that our macronutrients don't. And if you want to look at it another way, they help some of the macronutrients do their thing. So they're sort of the behind the scenes players, so to speak. And again, on this slide, we do talk about them typically being based on their properties: water soluble and fat soluble. Water soluble are like your B vitamins, vitamin C. Fat solubles, vitamins A, D, E, and K. Minerals aren't much different than vitamins. We have our calcium, iron, magnesium, sodium, potassium. The list is actually quite long, and we'll get into some of those today. So the categories. The categories by which the categories that we're going to present these vitamins and minerals in are the following. First, those involved with fluid and electrolyte balance. Next, we'll talk about those that have an antioxidant function. We'll talk about those involved with bone health. And then finally, we'll finish with energy, metabolism, and blood health. And so here's a good slide. And so, for all these nutrients that we're going to discuss in this section, and for studying purposes and exam purposes, I want to be clear that I won't test you on vitamins and minerals that aren't mentioned in this discussion, but I recognize there's a lot more. I think for the nature of this course and sort of your application of this material, we're covering the main ones. So a good exercise that I suggest all of you do to help prepare for the exam associated with this is to make a table. Make a list of the four categories, identify the vitamins and minerals within each category, and then set up a column. What is the minimum need for them? I'll tell you this right now, I'm not going to test you on specific numbers when it comes to, what is the RDA for vitamin A? How much do you need per day? I'm not going to ask you those specific numbers. To me, that's too nitty gritty for a class like this, and I really want you to more understand the overall function of them. So, but still, in this table, do yourself a favor, add a little extra information. What is the RDA or the RDI, whatever, the recommended daily intake for that nutrient, and then identify toxicity symptoms, or deficiency symptoms. So make a column for deficiency symptoms, make one for toxicity. So deficiency refers to, hey, if we don't get enough of this nutrient, what's going to start? What are some of the symptoms? What are we going to start to see? In our society, both Australian and American, issues of deficiency are relatively rare. On the flip side, toxicity issues, also rare, but people do sometimes consume too much of a given food or take supplements in excess amounts. I know iron toxicity is quite common, especially in younger or smaller people. So identify those symptoms on both sides. Deficiency, toxicity is if you've had too much. What is that level? If you want to identify a level, hey, how much vitamin A can you have before we start to see these toxic symptoms? And then finally, identify a good food source of that nutrient. What you'll have is then a nice finished product with a great table that sort of gives you the explanation of a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in this discussion. One note before we get into the fluid and electrolyte balance is this issue of taking vitamins and mineral supplements. And you don't have to look far on the internet or Google Scholar or do some literature searches. There's plenty of research out there that's looked at the effectiveness of supplements on our health. Multivitamins, individual vitamins, high doses, low doses. And with those studies, you will see equal number of sort of conflicting results or responses. And you will find studies that say, no, vitamins and mineral supplements don't help at all. And you'll see some that's like, oh, absolutely, take vitamin C when you have a cold. It lessens the severity of the symptoms, makes the cold go away faster, whatever. So there is a lot of information out there on them. And so at least a good approach for all of you is to always first, try and obtain your vitamins and minerals through real food. I think the whole real food mantra is what this class is kind of all about and has become. Is there a need for supplements? It's insurance policy, right? Our food supply, as we're learning as we go through this course, our food supply is pretty crappy, right? The processing of foods, in its inherent nature, processing foods makes them less nutritious. We're stripping the nutrients out of them, so we're finding less of the vitamins and minerals naturally within our foods. It leads to us needing these supplements at times, I believe. And if you're doing a great job of eating a nice real food diet, fantastic. Don't worry about the supplements. But unfortunately, we are the victims of sort of a poison food supply. And if you're not doing the best job of getting all the nutrients through your food, then I think supplements could be of benefit. A lot of the research out there and a lot of the research that says supplements aren't useful are those that did the research right. They took subjects who were eating very healthy diets and then added vitamin and mineral supplements on top of those healthy diets and didn't notice a benefit. And that sometimes makes sense. Well, they're already getting the vitamins, so adding more doesn't help. So anyway, just some suggestions. All right, our first category, fluid and electrolyte balance. And so we have a category of pretty much all minerals at this point, sodium, potassium, chloride, and phosphorus. I put calcium in there because it also plays a role in fluid and electrolyte balance, but it's also a nutrient that's in another category. And you're going to find that, right? Some of these nutrients will have multiple functions, but those are the main ones associated with fluid and electrolyte balance. Let's talk a little bit about fluids first. Just some sort of the Cliff Notes version. Most of our body is composed of fluids. I think you should all know that at this point. Most of it, about 2/3, is within our body cells, and we call that intracellular fluid. The rest is called extracellular fluid because it does not exist within the cells, but actually outside of cells. A graphic like this, we're looking at a blood vessel, and we have the fluid within the blood. The plasma would be considered extracellular fluid. That is fluid that is not within a cell. But then we also have sort of a cross section of a red blood cell here, and the fluid within the red blood cell would be intracellular fluid. So just an example of those two sort of potential places that you'd find fluids in our body. So the function of fluid in our body is, there's a number of them. For the transport of nutrients, it becomes essential, right? And that's in our blood, right? So most of our blood is made up of fluid, right? Our plasma. Nutrients that we consume, if you remember back in the digestion talk, nutrients get absorbed into the bloodstream and they get transferred that way. Also through our lymphatic system, right? Within the lymph, there is also fluid. So fluids also account for our blood volume. And so when we start talking about dehydration, which will happen later, blood volume is what we lose, right? So when we start to sweat a lot, right, a lot of that sweat comes from our blood volume starts to drop. Dehydration kicks in, not a good thing, right? Body temperature, so through sweating and shivering, right? But sweating is a way that we help maintain body temperature. By having that, sweat evaporate on our skin, it actually lowers the temperature through that convectional heat loss. And then finally, another function is to protect and lubricate body tissues, right? And if you just envision us not having fluid in our body and how we would move and function, that protection and lubrication just makes sense, I hope. All right, so the category or the group of nutrients that we're really talking about are also often called electrolytes, right? And you find electrolytes advertised to be present in a lot of sports drinks and all that good stuff. So our body fluid is composed of water and these electrolytes. And these electrolytes can be defined as mineral salts, and they include, sodium, potassium, chloride, phosphorus, and yes, calcium. So what do these electrolytes do? How do they function to help us regulate our body fluids? Well, water is very much drawn to these electrolytes, so it follows the movement of them. And so the process of osmosis is where we have, electrolytes will draw fluid to them even through tissue membranes. And so if an electrolyte makes it into a tissue, it'll bring water or fluid with it. A fancy graphic, right? This is seriously like, 8th grade science class experiment, but you have a glass of water with a permeable membrane separating it. You can add something very high in these electrolytes, which would be table salt, sodium chloride. And what happens? Well, the osmotic pull of the salt will, like the graphic shows in the letter C there, is that it will pull fluid across the membrane towards the electrolytes. And so that's kind of how they function in our body. So we get these electrolytes in our cells and they'll draw fluids to it and actually hold on to it for quite a while. So some of the functions of these electrolytes specifically, they help nerves respond to stimuli. And so for those of you following along in your physiology classes, right, we have these sodium potassium channels, right, where we talk about the depolarization of nerve membranes and how it's the exchange of these ions across a membrane that equal its that change in polarity. Well, it's these electrolytes that have played a huge role in that, obviously. So the communication between nerves couldn't be efficient without electrolytes in our body. They also signal our muscles to contract, and this is mostly picking on calcium, right? Obviously, the signal for our muscles to contract does come from nerves, and so that's from the previous slide, but then getting at the muscular level, right? And those of you following along with the sliding filament model and have some experience with that, we see calcium within the muscle, within the filaments of the muscle, the actin and the myosin, and it plays a role in helping, expose the binding sites for myosin on actin. So calcium plays a direct role in really helping the muscles contract. Even at the neuromuscular junction, we have calcium playing a role by being released into the alpha motor neuron that initiates the release of acetylcholine from that neuron into the synaptic cleft. So play some important roles with muscle contraction, so therefore body movement. And when it comes to fluid balance, obviously when we lose water, we need to replace it, right? And we've all been thirsty before, and that's our body's way of letting us know that we've lost some water. Where do we lose water? Urine, obvious place, right? Sweat, another obvious one. Exhalation, maybe not so obvious, but the humidification of the air that we breathe. Each breath that we breathe in relatively dry air, depending on where you live, and we exhale pretty much saturated air, meaning it's been humidified. At each breath, we're losing a little bit of body water. So, and also in our feces, we lose a little bit. How do we get it back? Well, mostly through consuming beverages, but we also find fluids in our food. Thinking back to our metabolism discussion, right? That end product of metabolism was the formation of water. And so even through metabolic reactions, we're getting some, but not enough to rely on as a reliable hydrator. Let's just leave it at that. So if we're looking specifically at water, we need it. We can go without water for only a few days before we're in serious, before there's a serious risk of death. We can go without food for much, much longer. How much water should we be consuming? There's a whole bunch of different ways to, there's a whole bunch of different sources that list different sort of levels of need for water. There's just a couple up here, or just one right now. So 1 to 1.5 milliliters for each calorie expended. It's pretty specific, but if you are someone who, between your basal metabolism and your daily activity, you're burning 300 calories a day, you're expending 3,000 calories a day, you should be consuming anywhere from 3,000 to, 4,500 milliliters of water. And keep in mind that, 1 gallon, if we're going to switch to American units or English units, is about 4 liters, so 4,000 milliliters. So if you're someone who's burns about 3,000 calories a day, we're talking about in the neighborhood of a gallon or a little bit less per day of fluids. Definitely this value varies based on your environment. If you're in a hot, humid environment and you're sweating a lot, that's going to go way up. Also, if you're highly active, right, through sweat, that sweating, you can lose quite a bit of fluids, and so we need to be mindful of that. Are there issues with drinking too much water? Yes. It's not very common, but it might be more common than you realize. Overhydration is somewhat rare. People don't naturally overhydrate. If you just left somebody with a big gallon of, or a massive tank of water in a room, they wouldn't drink themselves to the point where they'd overhydrate. We have a good enough thirst mechanism to where we usually drink until we're satisfied, until things are where they should be, and then we stop. There are circumstances where people force themselves to drink, and that's when we typically see issues with overhydration. We do see cases in marathons, and especially ultra marathons, where the athletes competing are drinking water and water only, or at least too much water throughout the duration of an event. And as the event goes on, they do lose some electrolytes through sweat, obviously, right? And so as the event goes on, they're diluting their blood with just water. They're not replacing the electrolytes at a high enough rate, and so then we see a dilution of the electrolytes throughout their body, right? There's not enough. Oftentimes, unfortunately, you'll also see hazing incidents or even competitions where drink as much water as you can and not go to the bathroom, and whoever does that wins a car or something along those lines. I'm gonna let that go. My apologies. Moving back. And so, what if we don't drink enough water? This is obviously a much more common scenario, right? We become dehydrated. And the definition of dehydration and discussions about that's a whole nother class, at the very least a whole nother lecture. But dehydration is a situation where our body fluids drop below a certain level, right? It was homeostatic. We're a couple percent below that homeostatic place. Depending on who you look at, at least a 1%, but usually 2% dehydration, meaning we've lost about 2% of our body weight from fluids, is sort of what's considered a significant dehydration, where we start to see some symptoms. Infants and the elderly are especially vulnerable. Why? Well, infants, it might be obvious, might not, but they can't talk, and so it's up to us, or the people taking care of them, to provide them with the opportunity to drink. And so sometimes that doesn't happen, and so therefore they can get dehydrated quite quickly, and they're also a lot smaller, and so them losing some fluids that we wouldn't think would be considerable to them, that might be a pretty large proportion of their body weight. The elderly are vulnerable as well, partially because their thirst mechanism becomes a little less sensitive, and so there is sort of almost like a forgetfulness to drink fluids over time, and by the time one realizes that they're dehydrated, it's there's symptoms, and so dealing with those symptoms, whatever they might be, the most benign are, I'm a little bit cranky and have a little bit of a headache, to you can go into a coma and die, obviously. So so there's a whole range of issues associated with dehydration. The spectrum of disorders related to sort of the fluid and electrolyte imbalance issues. Dehydration is probably the most common. Um, Mild dehydration is very easily treated. It's just drink some fluids. But then we start getting into heat stroke, and this is something that we see a lot in the summer with athletes, competing outdoors or doing long events, even not outdoors, but just in warmer climates, indoors or outdoors, and so not maintaining body temperature, we start to see issues with heat stroke. Water intoxication, that's that over-consuming water, which we talked about in the previous slide. Hypertension, not something we've mentioned yet, but if we are forcing fluid into our body, a lot of that, or almost all of it, actually starts off going into our circulatory system. And so early on, that expands our blood volume and can cause high blood pressure. And so for people who are particularly vulnerable to issues associated with high blood pressure, people at risk for a cardiac event, they need to be careful with how much not only fluids they drink, but also the amount of electrolytes. Because consuming electrolytes, you all know this, right? Consuming salty foods, right? A lot of sodium chloride in there, it makes us thirsty, and then we drink more to deal with that. And so we start to get bloated with extra body fluid. People with high blood pressure kind of want to avoid that. There are also some neuropsychiatric disorders associated with it. We're not going to get into that, and muscle disorders, and that's really sort of getting into things with fatigue and lack of coordination in terms of loss of electrolytes, and so cramping and that kind of stuff. So my challenge is to you: find some natural sources of these minerals, right? Of these electrolytes: sodium, potassium, chloride, phosphorus. Find calcium as well. Some might be easier to identify than others, but have a look around. All right, next topic: antioxidants. Antioxidants are pretty cool topic. Pretty cool category. So we got vitamin C, vitamin E, beta carotene, vitamin A, selenium, and I put the dots there. There is a lot more in this category that you could throw in there. These are just some of the main ones. So let's get an understanding of what antioxidants are, what they do. Antioxidants are chemicals that protect cells from damage, usually oxidative damage, so that's why they're called antioxidants. Again, our group of nutrients that we mentioned are at the top bullet there, but that second bullet, there's flavonoids, there's isoflavones, zinc is an antioxidant, coenzyme Q10 has become quite popular the last maybe decade now. Melatonin, there's antioxidants everywhere, and you'll see a lot of food products boast about the levels of antioxidants you'll see in them. Blueberries, great source of antioxidants. Oh, dark chocolate, another great source of antioxidants. Red wine, they're in there as well. So you'll see companies, products being pushed for the antioxidant content. Let's understand the function of these antioxidants and why they're so important to us. First, let's talk about the atom. Atom is the smallest unit of matter, right? They're composed of a nucleus and electrons. If we want to look at a graphic representation of them, we have our nucleus with the electrons spinning around it. The electrons are usually in pairs, and so and molecules are made up of these atoms, right? And so during metabolic reactions, these electrons can be transferred. They can be transferred from the atoms of one molecule to the atoms of another. Right? And here's a fancy cartoon of that, right? So we have oxidation reactions where an electron is taken away. Reduction is where an electron is added to a molecule. And so there's this exchange, right? And when we are metabolically active, which exercise is the prime example where we're most metabolically active, times of stress as well, and there's other situations, but when we are metabolically active, these reactions, they're called oxidation and reduction reactions, are going on all over the place, just to maintain that high level of metabolism. And so they're an exchange reaction, they occur together, so oxidation, reduction. So oxidation, so stable atoms contain, and like I mentioned earlier, right, atoms, they will contain an even number of paired electrons, right? So the electrons like to hang out in pairs, even numbers. A free radical is an atom that has lost an electron, is left with an unpaired electron. So there's an uneven number of electrons on an atom that's called a free radical. Now, it's a cool name for sure, but what's the deal with these free radicals? Well, they're really highly reactive and can cause damage to molecules in the cell. And so, I don't know if that little cartoon at the bottom does any good, but these free radicals are very damaging cells, and they will wreak havoc on healthy cells. And so a high production of free radicals can lead to the deterioration, the lack of function, it can lead to the breakdown of other molecules and the tissues that they're associated with. So, fancy graphic here on the formation of free radicals, not a big deal, but we have this exchange of electrons, and somewhere in the process of these exchange reactions, the oxidation and reduction, we lose an electron, and therefore we end up producing a free radical. The formation of these free radicals, I already mentioned metabolism. I think that's one of the primary sources of it, right? So it's a natural thing. It's not like, oh, we can't prevent it entirely. But we have some external sources, pollution, and right, and that's a big word. But most sources of pollution, whether it's through skincare products that you're using and they have toxic chemicals in them, if it's air pollution, if it's basically exposure to toxic substances, which I guess is that last bullet there. Ultraviolet light as well, and so prolonged exposure to the sun, cover up. Free radicals will result if you don't. So some specifics, free radicals, they damage cell membranes, they can damage and oxidize our low density lipoproteins. And if you recall, or if you know that these low density lipoproteins, they're sort of categorized as the bad cholesterol. Well, it's when they become oxidized that they are most dangerous and the most damaging to our body. And so exposure of LDLs to free radicals is sort of like a double whammy. It can damage proteins in the cell. It can damage our DNA. So really, without getting too deep into it, there's really no limit on the potential damage that they can do. So how do antioxidants help us, right? How do they deal with these free radicals? Well, a couple different ways. One is that some will donate an electron to a free radical to stabilize them, right? So remember, free radical is unstable because it's missing an electron. Well, we have some antioxidants that can donate an electron and not become free radicals themselves, which is important, right? And through that process, stabilize the free radical. So we've neutralized it, right? They're not free radicals anymore. We have some minerals that act with enzyme systems to destroy free radicals, right? So they kind of come in there and just blast them. They recognize the free radicals, and through the work of, or through the sort of the synergy of this minerals with the enzymes, they will destroy the free radicals. And there's a couple listed there. Those aren't on the list. You won't be tested on those, but superoxide dismutase, catalase, glutathione, and peroxidase are just a few of these sort of enzyme complexes that work with minerals to literally blast free radicals out of our body. The statement on the bottom there, for athletes, reduction of free radicals can lead to improved recovery, strength gains, and stronger immunity. And so there is a fair amount of research on there on antioxidant supplements on athletes, and healthy people, of course, but athletes specifically, and what do antioxidant supplements do for them? And there's enough evidence, right, to feel confident that antioxidants for athletes should be a regular part of their supplement regimen to help with improving recovery, helping with strength gains, and even keeping the immune system strong. Part of the effect of these antioxidants is they do sort of help lead to a lower inflammatory response to training. And because of that, right, if we reduce the inflammation, we are seeing strength gains happen a little bit quicker, right? It's not like magic and it's, people become huge overnight, but a little bit of reduction in inflammation from taking these antioxidants, they do have an anti-inflammatory effect because they're minimizing the free radicals. The free radicals are pro-inflammatory. We are seeing some positive results in athletes who are supplementing them. So find some food sources. Vitamin E, vitamin A are sort of fat-soluble antioxidants. Vitamin C, beta carotene, selenium. Again, the list is quite long. Build your table up, right? Go find some natural food sources of them. Tell me what toxicity issues there are, what deficiency issues there might be. That's all good stuff. All right. Next category, we're almost done. We're halfway done. Bone health. So these are nutrients involved with keeping our bones healthy. It's a little bit more specific of a category than fluid balance and antioxidant function, but enough of one to warrant sort of being separated. So calcium, phosphorus, vitamin D are our three main players here. Bone health is a big issue, right? We all appreciate the function of our bones. What do bones do? Well, they provide a support, of course, flexibility, right? I mean, they're obviously an integral part of us being able to move. So the content of our bones, about 65% of our bones are made up of minerals. They provide the hardness of bone. About 35%, so the rest is collagenous tissue, which provides a little bit more flexibility and other organic structures that give it strength and some flexibility, right? We need that flexibility, otherwise our bones would be quite brittle. So when it comes to bone health, right? So bone tissue is a living tissue, obviously. And it's constantly going through a process of sort of formation, right? And so the term remodeling is often used. And so we have this process of resorption of bones, and that's the breaking down of the surface of the bone, right? So when bone tissue gets old, it needs to be broken down to be replaced by fresher, more viable tissue. And we have specific cells called osteoclasts, and these are cells that actually erode the surface of our bones. And then we have the formation of new bone cells, right? Because obviously if you're going to get rid of the old, you need to come in with the new. And so the formation of new bone cells is done by cells called osteoblasts. And so, a great mnemonic that I was taught many years ago is osteoblasts with the B is B for building. And then the class, I guess the C is for consumption. So osteoblasts, the building cells, they will produce mostly the collagen containing component of the bone. And so when we talk about bone health, bone density is something that's measurable, and it's something that we look at. Most of us reach peak bone density somewhere around the age of 30. From there is usually a slow but steady loss of bone density as we age. When we're younger, right, this whole remodeling process, it's a good balance, right, of the osteoclasts and osteoblasts. As we get older, our osteoblasts aren't doing their job as well, or maybe it's the clasts that are working overtime, but either way, the balance shifts a little bit, and the breakdown, right, the blasts are doing a little bit more work than the clasts, other way around, dang it. The clasts, the ones that are consuming bone, are working harder than the blasts, and so once we start to get a little bit older, our bone mineral density does drop. Bones are just like any other tissue in our body; they adapt to how we use them, and so obviously weight-bearing exercise, and I'm sure some of you've seen pictures of a chronic or a lifelong swimmer's bone, like a femur, versus a runner, and the femur of a swimmer is much thinner. They're not really using it in the same way a runner is. The runner has very strong, very thick bones. And so bones, as we age, can also be maintained, right? We can maintain that bone mineral density through regular weight-bearing physical activity. If bones get, bone mineral density drops below a certain point, it becomes a clinical condition called osteoporosis. It includes low bone mineral density, the deterioration of bone tissue. Our bones will become fragile as it progresses, and that's why it does become quite important to identify people with osteoporosis, because bone fractures are especially, at any age are troublesome, but as we age, become more and more of an issue. Bones start to compact, and so people, as we age, right, we get shorter after a certain point. And so that's part of that is because the density and the strength of our bones is starting to get compromised. There's certain risk factors for osteoporosis. We won't go into the details of these much, but age, so as we get older, it becomes worse. Gender, women are at greater risk than men. There's a genetic component as well. Nutrition, yes, nutrition does play a role. That's the purpose of this class, I guess, is to understand what that role is. But But there's definitely foods that will contain nutrients that will encourage bone density and physical activity, right? And so really, two of these 5 factors are very much in our control, right? Nutrition and physical activity. The first 3 we really can't do much about. In terms of reversing or treating osteoporosis, there really isn't a cure yet, and this is obviously getting outside of the scope of this class anyway, but there are definitely ways to slow it. And so, there are prescriptions for individuals who are at risk or showing signs or have osteoporosis to start increasing their intake of nutrients like calcium and vitamin D, to start participating in regular exercise. And there's some medications out there now that are helping, and they're sort of the anti-resorptive medications, right? They're slowing the breakdown of the bone tissue to help minimize the loss of that bone mineral density. So calcium, phosphorus, vitamin D are those 3 main players. Do yourself a favor, look them up, find some natural sources. They're out there. All right, last but not least. So the last category are nutrients involved with energy, metabolism, and blood health. We have our B vitamins, there's a bunch of them, and iron primarily. Vitamins and metabolism, and so, the metabolic process is so reliant on so many different nutrients. The B vitamins primarily are the ones that play the biggest role. Vitamins do not provide energy directly, and you should know that at this point, right? When we talk through that whole metabolism discussion, when did we talk about vitamins? Really never. But they are sort of the behind the scenes player. They're the ones that help us liberate energies, if you want to put it that way, or reform ATP within our body. So you've been introduced to enzymes and coenzymes, I think, in this term, at least enzymes for sure. They're required to help metabolic reactions occur, or at least expedite the speed in which they occur. Coenzymes, I don't know if we talked about them much. They're molecules that combine with an enzyme to facilitate enzyme function. So it's really, they help sort of activate an enzyme to make it useful. They need to be present to really help that enzyme do its thing. Yeah, so a graphic on sort of enzymes, coenzymes, sort of explaining the way coenzymes function to help a chemical reaction take place. I think this comes from the Fink text, but I'm not sure. So our B vitamins. Some of you may supplement B vitamins. You find B vitamins, I'm sure it's still popular. I know I see them around here in Australia quite a bit. I'm sure there are still in the States, but we have the 5-hour energies and some of these other energy drinks that are not healthy. If you look closely at the ingredients list for a lot of them, you'll see B vitamins in massive amounts, right? There's 5,000% of your day's need of vitamin B12, I think, in the 5-hour energy, right? That's a lot of vitamin B, and so they're taking advantage of their role in metabolism. If they can do a little bit to sort of kickstart metabolism, taking a lot, will that do a lot for metabolism? Well, for a short time, yes, they can they can give you a boost. So the B vitamins assist in metabolism of carbs, proteins, and fats. Other roles that they play, healthy nerve cells, which leads to good neurological functioning. So they play important roles outside of metabolism for sure. The formation of DNA is out there. Lack of B vitamins, and so people who don't get a good amount of B vitamins in their diet starts to lead to things like weakness and fatigue. The problem is in our society, if people are low in B vitamins, and if you start to show up with symptoms of weakness and fatigue, it could be a million other things, right? And so it's not, a lack of vitamin status is usually the last thing looked at, but you never know. That's enough on the B vitamins. Iron is, this is our blood health, and so iron is part of a protein on red blood cells called hemoglobin. Oxygen and carbon dioxide actually as well, but they both bind to hemoglobin, and so the delivery of oxygen to our tissues to give us that oxygen for metabolism, to help us, basically regenerate ATP is a huge, and very important function. So the role of hemoglobin in our body and the status of hemoglobin is in part dictated by our iron status. And also, the carrying carbon dioxide out of our body, which is a byproduct of metabolism. When it builds up, it will lead to fatigue, and so getting that out of us is important as well. So hemoglobin is an essential molecule. Low iron status, and you often heard the term anemia, will lead to low hemoglobin concentration in our blood. And so people with the low iron status will also kind of have similar symptoms of people with low B vitamin status. They'll be fatigued. Hard to sometimes do exercise, and you don't know, am I fatigued, am I just tired, am I just eating bad food, what is it? It's usually more chronic in nature. Iron status is often checked. Iron deficient anemia is pretty common, especially in women, more so than in men. So it is something that is quite common. There's also something called runner's anemia, and some of you may be familiar with that, but we have a situation, especially in long distance runners who are putting in massive miles, the process of the heel strike, and so your heel striking the ground every stride when you're running, especially because you're sort of lifting your whole body off the ground, and every step you're catching your body weight just on the end of your heel. The blood that's in your heel contains red blood cells, and that pressure of your heel striking the ground will cause those red blood cells, some of them, to pop, right? They break. And that will lead to a sort of a different type of anemia, right? Because it's not necessarily low iron status, but you're losing red blood cells and therefore the ability to carry oxygen because of that. And for people who do have this type of anemia, iron supplementation is somewhat helpful to help increase the reproduction of these hemoglobin cells. So get out there, see what the B vitamins are all about, deficiency symptoms, toxicity symptoms, iron as well. Iron toxicity, like I said earlier, is really common, especially in younger children. You'll see foods fortified with B vitamins and iron quite a bit, and you can get, I think if you look at a Cheerios box of Cheerios, I think it has half your day's supply of iron, I think, in one serving. You get a kid putting down a whole box of iron, a whole box of Cheerios, that's a lot of iron. So there are sort of, places where we find these nutrients where it gives us easy access to them, and not being mindful of how much we're eating could cause toxicity issues, especially with iron. So here's another sort of reminder, do yourself a favor and put this table together. I tried to be sort of efficient with getting through this talk. I didn't want to get into the nitty-gritties too much. Understand the categories, the nature of the categories, what's fluid balance all about, what's antioxidants and what are these free radicals all about. So understand the categories, then understand remember what nutrients are within those categories, and then learn a little bit about their specific function, and that will really help prepare you for the exam. It's a weird part, right? This class is so much about eating real food, and one of the great things about improving our diet is that the vitamins and mineral issue becomes a non-issue, because we know if we're eating good food throughout the day from varied sources, we're eating natural food and seasoned food, all that good stuff, right? We're eating healthy food from healthy animals and healthy plants, we're going to be healthy, and so we don't need to concern ourselves with vitamins and minerals. But on the flip side, from a supplemental aspect in terms of athletics and improving performance or even improving health, knowing what taking some of these does, even in the presence of a healthy diet, is beneficial. And our food supply doesn't always give us the opportunity to maximize health and get all these vitamins and minerals in our diet. So understanding their role because of that as well is important. You're surely going to have you're going to have clients at some point that are going to be, hey, this is what I eat on a regular basis. You're going to be like, oh my God, you get no antioxidants in your diet whatsoever. So let's start figuring out ways to get them in your diet, or maybe consider a supplement or whatever. So, all right. Here's an example before I leave of what this table looks like, just sort of the beginning phases. Antioxidant category, vitamin C, what's our recommended intake? Greater than 10 grams a day, and that's not a typo. Yeah, you'll start getting diarrhea. That's a lot of vitamin C, right? Deficiency issues, scurvy. Most of you've heard the term scurvy, and doesn't happen too much anymore. But some good sources: citrus fruits, berries, tomato, capsicum. For those of you in America, that would be the equivalent of red pepper or peppers. Broccoli is a great source. One thing about vitamin C, sorry, I'm dragging this on now. It's really susceptible to heat, and so it's destroyed through cooking. And so if you heat it above, I think somewhere around 120, 130 degrees Fahrenheit, it's useless. And so things like tomato sauce that brag about their vitamin C, if you cook it, it's no more. So anyway, creating a table like this is something I recommend. That's it.